Wilder 3 question. And then, of course, we'll do a deep dive on Tommy.
Yeah, hold on 1 second. Okay, all right, there we go.
There we go. That'll work. Okay. Al, we got you turned sideways somehow.
Pardon?
So somehow your camera's turned to the side there. There we go. That works much better. Much better. All right, now we're up and running. Okay. So we are recording. All right, so we're going to come down in 3, 2, and 1. On our phone lines now, Grego, we are joined by an absolute legend in the fight game. You likely best know him for his boxing analysis on Showtime's Championship Boxing, a longtime newspaper man, author of the book 30 Years, 30 Undeniable Truths About Boxing, Sports, and Television, an accredited actor, and a musician with 2 albums and performances up and down the Las Vegas strips. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the great Al Bernstein. Al, how you doing, my friend?
I'm good. With that introduction, I feel awed. You made me sound a lot better than I am.
Man, we're the ones that's odd. I didn't even know about the musician stuff until I started researching you. And man, that's amazing.
Yeah, I just did a show the other night, last Friday, at the Tuscany Hotel and Casino. We did a music show, so it was fun.
Man, that's amazing. Darren?
Oh, he's a living legend, that's for sure. And I even made my wife listen to is it Kenny Davidson? Is that your guy?
Yeah,
that
that's where we go to do the music. Yeah.
Awesome.
Well, of course, we're on limited time with you, and thank you for gracing us with your presence. So we're going to jump into it. First of all, the boxing world is still buzzing over the Fury Wilder 3 fight, and I believe you were in the building. You didn't call it, so you actually got to go as a fan, which has got to be a treat for you. What were your thoughts and takeaways of that real quick before you do a Tommy Morrison spectacular show deep dive?
Yeah, it was amazing, and it was fun because I was just watching it. I didn't have to do anything. I wasn't involved in the coverage, and it was, an extraordinary night on every level. And I was privileged to do their first fight, which was very good. That was the one in which, of course, Wilder had Fury down twice. He got up. I mean, excuse me.
Listen.
Thank you. He got up amazingly and survived, and it was a controversial draw. And then the second fight dominated by Fury. This one, it's interesting. Tyson Fury was on the edge of starting to dominate this fight when that right hand landed by Fury. He and part of the reason it landed is because Tyson Fury forgot the basic tenet of what he does, which is everything you do is predicated on the jab. He didn't jab his way in. He just bull rushed his way in, and that right hand found him. And we heard his trainer, Sugar Hill, remind him in the middle of the fight, you have to use your jab. And when he did use the jab, he controlled Wilder. But it was an extraordinary event, a tremendous fight. And I think punctuates what has been, even though boxing's had it, also hits, it always does, it's not so perfect stories this year. I think the product boxing's put on this year has been spectacular, and I thought that fight kind of punctuated.
100%.
Yeah, I thought Malik Scott, I drew a blank. Wilder's trainer had a very good strategy. The first 2 rounds, he was working the jab, going to the body. He looked different, and then all of a sudden he reverted back to his old ways, and kind of, the size advantage and or disadvantage for him was the ultimate demise. But he's got that one knock, that huge power, and that bailed him out for a little bit. But he took a beating in that fight. But I respect him for going through with that, and that was a fun trilogy, and it's still got the boxing world buzzing. But without further ado, it is time to do a deep dive into Tommy. You're a man that was with Top Rank Boxing for a long time and I can't even remember how many Tommy Morrison fights you did. Of course, I was glued to the TV, and I was fortunate to go see Tommy fight many times in person. What was your takeaways of the Tommy's careers as far as up and downs? And I know his story's been well documented. We're going to give it a little fresh angle, but what was your takeaway on Tommy's up and downs on his careers and your interactions with him?
Well, first, I always enjoyed interacting with Tommy. He was one of the most cooperative, easy to deal with fighters. Most fighters are, actually. People don't realize that, but he was a delight to deal with. And whatever Tommy's demons that ended up being difficult for him, he was a professional, and doing his fights was fun because he was involved in a lot of interesting fights, to be sure. I mean, I did, a number of Tommy Morrison fights when he was on the ESPN Top Rank show, including the crazy night in which he fought Tim Tomaszek, when Tim Tomaszek came out of the stands and fought him that night, because I think Mike Williams, I think, was a fighter who decided to leave the building on the night of the fight. He just said, "I'm leaving." And then
it was either he didn't want to take a drug test, or his back allegedly acted up or something. He's like, "I'm out.
He was gone.
See you later."
And Tomaszek came in. So I did a lot of Tommy's fights, and it was always a joy dealing with him.
One of the questions I have is one of his less than stellar nights. He fought Ross Purity to a draw where Tommy was down twice, and unfortunately ESPN ran out of time, so we didn't get an interview afterwards. Were you able to interview Tommy after that fight just to see what was going on, if you recall that? Because I was always curious.
I didn't interview him. We didn't do an actual interview with him because we went off the air, and back then, they weren't like cooperating with SportsCenter, and the remote people weren't in sync like they are now, and to get an interview and then put it on somewhere. So we never did. I think we talked to him afterwards, and he just was an off night for him. He just didn't feel right physically, and he just underperformed.
I still had him winning a fight, I believe 96-94, even with those two knockdowns. But yeah, he just I don't know if he trained.
Well, the other interesting thing is Ross Purity was the guy who gave a lot of top heavyweights problems. He didn't become a champion or anything of that nature, but he
beat a Klitschko.
Number. Pardon?
He beat a Klitschko.
He did beat a Klitschko, and there aren't too many people that can make that claim.
That's for sure. Well, one of my other working Tommy theories that my Tommy Morrison fans wanted to ask you was, it seemed like after the Foreman fight, when he changed the style to box, which he had to do against Foreman because he can't stand in front of Foreman, he never really got back to that aggressive gunslinging mentality like you saw with the Ross Tuckers and the Camille Odoms, and he never really got back to that, and that seemed to hinder him as his career went on. Do you think there's any substance to that, or just?
I don't know, maybe a little. I mean, I think the Foreman fight, they devised that plan because they said which was surprising and shocking to everybody. Nobody thought, who knew Tommy Morrison could do that for 12 rounds, and he did. And maybe it made it. Maybe he was more. Maybe the more measured style that hurt him after that. I don't know. He still had good moments, and I think the fights he lost, things like the fight to Lewis, and of course the Bent loss had come before. Was that before or after Foreman? I forgot.
That was his second fight after Foreman. Yeah, I drove 7 hours from Austin, Texas to Tulsa with my dad to see that, and
in that one he did attack, and of course he had Bent in trouble. In a way, he attacked, right? Because Bent was able to land the counterpunch that would hurt him. So there were still aggressive moments for him. If anything, maybe that was the fight that made him more, less, more defensive. But it's hard to tell what led him to be not quite the attacker that he had been.
One of the, I guess my analysis of Tommy was that, when he stepped up against Ray Mercer for 3 rounds, he looked like one of the best heavyweights on the planet.
Oh yeah.
And then, the Razor Ruddock, obviously, you and I were there. Obviously, you called the fight, just a legendary event. But when he stepped up against Lennox Lewis, then it clearly showed to me, as painful as it was, that, hey, he was a heck of a fighter, a fun fighter, a second-tier heavyweight. But as you were quoted on the 30 for 30, it was a very vibrant time for the heavyweight division. And Lennox, I've talked to Tommy Vergette's post early 2000s about the attack, but the plan was to go after Lennox Lewis like they did against Ray Mercer, and he could never get it going. And I was always depressed about that. But then you look back and realize that Lewis was a top 5 heavyweight of all time, and just used the jab and kept Tommy at bay, and Tommy had no head movement, and that pretty much summarizes his career. He was a second tier exciting rock star heavyweight, but he was never going to be able to have sustained success. Do you feel that's an accurate statement?
Yeah, to a point. Listen, he was a good fighter, really good fighter, and the losses he had, there were reasons for in most cases. I mean, the Michael Bent thing was kind of an aberration because he got hit with something, and that one's the hardest to explain. The Ray Mercer loss, simple to explain. Ray Mercer at that time had the greatest chin in boxing, and Tommy Morrison hit him with everything, but Ray Mercer was able to hurt him. The Lewis loss, again, explainable because Lennox Lewis, and I do think he's one of the top 5 heavyweights of all time. His physical dimensions and the way he fought did not mesh well for what Tommy wanted to do, and it was a hard, a very hard fight for him. So you look at the fights that he didn't fare well in, and you can kind of understand why they happened. But we saw him beat other really good heavyweights, and it was he was an excellent fighter, just an excellent fighter. And in any era would have been a really good heavyweight contender, and in an era of many championships, could have, certainly he did briefly have a version of the world championship, could have had a title at any time.
I always cling to the contention that if Tommy had beaten Bent and they fought in March of Lewis, was a March of '94 at the MGM Grand, that was supposed to happen, and Pepe Correa was still Lewis's trainer, I ought to have given Tommy a heck of a chance to win that, because Lewis didn't have the footwork at that time. Absolutely. And then Emmanuel Stewart comes along, and you're like, oh no.
I agree. And that, to me, that's kind of indicative of also the star-crossed life that Tommy had. Many times it just was a perfect storm of timing, and that loss to Bent, which nobody expected, was a killer for his career. And, that you're right. That was the Lewis trained by Pepe Correa. He had not yet become the fighter that Emmanuel Stewart would make him. And that would have been a very interesting fight, to be sure. And Tommy would have had a better chance to win.
Absolutely.
Did you have interaction with him when you guys were on the set of Rocky V? Tommy, outside of the boxing world, how was he how was he on the set? How was he just as a person like that?
Let me tell you two things about Tommy Morrison in that movie. Number one, he had never been in a movie before, right? He had a starring role in this movie. He had tons of dialogue. I'm not saying he was Robert De Niro or Matt Damon. However, the scenes I did that he was in, and the times I saw him on the set in other scenes, he never messed up. In movies, you have to redo shots over and over again. He never caused a stoppage in the cut. He knew every line. He delivered them the same way every time. There was not an up and down in his performance. Tommy Morrison was professional. Every single human on that movie respected him, and he did his job. And I believe that under that, among the many missed opportunities in Tommy Morrison's career, acting was one of them. There is no reason why, he unfortunately, he lost two other careers: broadcasting because of personal issues. He started to do broadcasting, which I think he would have been excellent at, and the movies. He could have been an action movie guy. I mean, there's no question about that. It's just a shame because those opportunities were there for him. And watching him in that Rocky film, to me, it's remarkable that a guy that never was in a movie did the job he did in that film.
Amazing.
Rocky V gets panned by everyone. I think it's a very realistic boxing movie. You got the Don King figure, the rising up and coming contender. And I mean, you can say what you want about the script, but I actually enjoyed the movie. I don't bash it at all.
Yeah, listen, it's not one of the jewels of the Rocky series, presumably, but I don't think it was a terrible movie. And I personally think it was the best of the Rocky movies because it was the only one I was in.
That's exactly right. That one had the great Albert.
So clearly it was the best one that was made.
Absolutely.
You should have gotten an Oscar nomination, sir.
Yeah, oh yeah. My brief scene. It's funny. I was supposed to announce the fights, but I went there and I couldn't. They had to delay doing the fight scenes, and I couldn't come back to do it. So they knew that was the case. So they threw me in that scene with the press conference just because I was there and they wanted to put me in the movie. So I wasn't even supposed to be in that scene. So I could have been not seen at all. And the funny thing is, just an FYI, a week ago, I got yet another residual check from Rockies for $152.
Hey.
About every 3 months, a small check. Sometimes, I mean, I don't think they've ever arranged. They don't nowadays. They don't exceed. They've never gotten to 200, but I will get a little check from Rocky, and I laugh because how many years are we away from that movie? 20-some, 30 years.
1990 was it 90 or 90? No, it was 90, I believe.
Yeah, so we're 30 years away from that movie plus, and that's why I tell my son, who's a singer-songwriter but also an actor, who's been in a lot of plays and a lot of other performances, but has not done movies yet. I say, you got to get in a movie series and get a starring role because you'll enjoy getting checks 15, 20 years later.
That's as good as an IRA or a pension.
Yeah, I haven't exactly gotten rich off it, but it's funny. Every time I get one of these little checks, I laugh.
All right, joined here by the future EGOT award winner, Hal Bernstein, as he's a man of stage and screen here on the Sports Narrative. Go ahead, Darren.
Well, we're going to transition real quick. Do you have any up and coming heavyweights that you're following that you think have huge futures right now?
Heavyweights. Oh boy. The heavyweight division is, Jared Anderson is somebody that I think has the skill set. We just saw him against limited opposition on the Fury Wilder card, but I think he's a fighter who, under the right circumstances, could be a player in the heavyweight division. He's got lots of power, delivers his punches well, and can throw some combinations. So he's a fighter to watch.
Now, have you followed our official prospect on the Eating Leather podcast, Xander Zejas, Puerto Rican, just jumped up from welterweight, 10-0, 7 KOs. He's got Felix Trinidad Part 2 written all over him.
He's a very talented young fighter. Yeah, he's a talented fighter. I haven't, dug into him because I haven't really announced his fights, but watching him fight, he's very talented.
Well, hopefully one day he'll make it over to Showtime and start making some big money, and you'll get a chance to commentate.
Well, I'd love it. It'd be fun for me because I'd like to commentate his fights for sure.
Yeah, he just has that killer instinct. That's what you see up close and personal. You can just tell when a guy's got a guy hurt, he's got that killer instinct. He'll go after you. He's not afraid. So he is our official prospect. Did you get to see Edward Berlanga the other day?
I did. I watched that. I was there for that fight, and he was, I think he did suffer an injury in the fight, which probably hampered him a little bit, but it also demonstrated that, he's not yet ready for the top 168 pounders, despite his remarkable knockout streak. He has still some things to clean up defensively before he's going to be ready for the top people in that division.
Yeah, as they say in Saturday Night Live, he's not ready for prime time yet. That the bloom is off the rose a little bit, but we'll see if he can bounce back after that bicep injury.
Right.
Yeah,
Well,
for sure.
thank you so much, sir, for hopping on with us. We can't thank you enough.
Good to be with you. That was fun.
I got another question here real quick.
Oh, yeah,
Just
I'm sorry.
As we talk about the kind of how boxing weathered through the pandemic and, what Top Rank did with the bubble there at MGM and it seems like it's kind of found some new footing and found a new place where it's getting a little bit of that revitalization, and obviously having some top rank heavyweights helps as well. How do you think boxing weathered the pandemic, and where do you think it's going to go going forward?
Well, I think that a lot of the sports came back better from the pandemic than people thought they would, both in terms of the product and the way it kind of the sports persevered. And boxing was an example of it. Top Rank led the way with their bubble, and then we did our bubble at the Mohegan Sun during the course of that for months. And the fights that were put on in the sport in 2020 were pretty good. At first they couldn't quite make the big matches that they wanted to, but then they did. And this year has been a superb year. So I think boxing, there's no one running all of boxing. So it wasn't probably a collective decision, but individually, everyone involved in the sport figured out that if we're going to get past this moment in a good way, we have got to really do our best. And they have. This has been the best year, 2021, for the actual product the sports put out in the last 5 or 6 years. So I think it augurs well for that sport moving forward. It's now seen on enough platforms worldwide. Fox just picked up their 4th year of boxing, which is good. It's on many platforms, and so people have a chance to see it. And for the most part, the sport is putting out good matches.
Do you think you'll see that level of cooperation? We've always had the fights about, who's going to fight who, and we always had the different camps that would argue about money or location or whatever. Do you think we're going to finally see that era of cooperation and kind of getting to that place where the big fights that people want to see, they'll actually get to see?
Well, some of them do come to fruition even now, but some don't. And right. I think what we need is, and ironically, even though we criticize the organizations that run boxing, and rightfully so, they sometimes now are being a force for good by forcing fights to happen, like Sean Porter and Terrence Crawford's a perfect example. And then the promoters kind of have to fall in line. So I think we will see the different promotional camps and let's be honest, some of the platforms that fighters are on have a vested interest in them as well. So we just saw ESPN and Fox combined for a pay-per-view, and while PBC and Top Rank combined for it. Right. We're going to see the Crawford Porter fight. Canelo was not with the same promotional company. He was an independent, and he decided to fight Plant. So there's more of that happening.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic for the sport going forward. I think the streaming platforms and all of that, and anytime we can get more Al Bernstein, we are always blessed. So,
well, thank you very much. I appreciate you guys visiting. It's fun. We'll do it again.
Absolutely, anytime.
Thank you, sir. What an honor.
Take care. Bye-bye.